So can I have the panelists join me up here, or am I going to do this on my own? Let's give our panelists a hand while they make their way up here. Whoa. Welcome, welcome. So as they sit down, I'm going to introduce myself. So I work here at JP Chase. My office is just around the corner. I cover what we call here at Chase emerging middle market. And what we define emerging middle market as is companies that do between 20 and 100 million in annual revenues. We have a lot of different industry verticals on our team. There's probably about 50 of us around the Bay, including Sacramento and Reno, that covers the Northern California / Nevada market. And some of my industry verticals are manufacturing, wholesale, distribution, and food. I call myself the blue-collar banker, is something to remember me by. So if you ever meet a blue-collar company, such as a manufacturer or a logistics company, I want you to think of me. So that's who I am, Chris Duarte, here at JP Chase. I'm going to go down the row here and get some introductions. And let's start with Daniela. Tell us who you are and where you work and how you take your coffee.
Maybe I can start with the coffee first, but first of all, I would love to say thank you for having me here, and it's fantastic to see such a big turnout, having a real-time event here in the Silicon Valley. So my name is Daniela. I work for Cathay Innovation, which is the venture arm of Cathay Capital. We are a 5.5 billion global fund with assets under management. Over 2 billion is dedicated to venture business only. I'm based here in San Francisco. I can tell a little bit more later about which verticals we cover. We do have over 280 investments to date from really the US, North America, Europe, and China, Southeast Asia, and joint ventures in LATAM with Seaya, as well as in Africa, which is over 2 billion fund as well. I'm gonna stop here and hand over back to you.
Perfect. Claudia, why don't you tell us about who you are, what you do, and where you're from?
How about my coffee?
Oh, you can. You got to turn your microphone on there. Click it. There you go. And of course, the coffee. So
Double espresso.
yes, perfect.
Yes. Well, my name is Claudia Pellerano. I'm wearing two different hats today here. I'm the president of Las Americas Industrial Free Zone. It is an industrial and service park in the Dominican Republic. We house multinational companies that come to our country and operate either to manufacture or provide services. We have electrical and electronic, plastic injection molding, apparel, jewelry manufacturing, medical device, sterilization, so it's a very broad and diverse kind of environment. So providing the infrastructure, operating the park, and providing the services is quite interesting, as you can imagine, and probably it fits a little bit with a lot of the things that you do because our clients are so diverse. I also am the president of the Association of Free Zones of what we call Iberoamerica, which is Latin America and Spain, which is a group that is here today with several of the countries. So hopefully I'll be able to see how we can link what we do with what you guys provide. Thank you.
Thank you. Believe it or not, Mario and I are not related. Even though that's probably a question that was going to come up later. But Mario, introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and what you bring with us today.
Okay. Well, first, Lisa, Brian, thank you for the invite. I'm Brazilian. I live in Mexico, and I used to work in a small company called Maersk, and I spent 25 years there. My last position was CEO of Mexico and Central America. And then one day I woke up and I said, I don't want to do this anymore. So I resigned and I went to do something else. And then one day I got an invitation from Brian to attend the event in 19, the last one that happened. And it blew my mind. We talk about supply chain and logistics, but we don't realize the world is a supply chain. I was with the CEO of CSCMP, which is a big supply chain organization here in the US, and he told me 80% of the workforce globally is somehow in supply chain. So when you start looking at the scale and what's needed, well, it's very big. And it's big problems as well. So I decided to set up shop in Mexico. Why Mexico? Well, we knew Maersk has been working on nearshoring now for 15 years. I had a front row into that. So I said, okay, it's going to be the easiest place for me to get customers. So I was right about that. And then we got started. So I run a supply chain management company, small outfit, growing very fast. And part of the problems that Brian and Refashioned are trying to solve, we are also from a business standpoint looking at, and how do you monetize on that, how do you reduce the transaction cost of supply chain, and doing a couple of things that I could not have done inside a very small corporation that I used to work before. Double espresso.
Double espresso. A lot of espresso. Raise your hand if you like double espresso here. Awesome. Daniela, let's go back to you. Tell us about Cafe Innovations and how your firm differentiates itself in the market and what your day-to-day life looks like.
Yes, I think our unique DNA in the market literally is bringing corporates and founders together. If I can raise one question into this room, and I would love to hear how everyone kind of separates from either or. Who's a founder in this room? Please raise your hand. And who comes from a corporation? Who works for a CVC, corporate venture capital arm? Okay. So what we're trying to achieve in terms of assets under management, usually institutional investors give us money for fund return, while we have our investment thesis given in 4 verticals, one of which is energy and mobility, that also includes climate tech and the entire transition going on in various parts of this world locally. We have digital healthcare, fintech, and then the last is consumer tech. So when we think about supply chain, that ranges obviously between fashion in the consumer tech world as well as in the mobility sector and manufacturing side, it can actually span across various verticals. Now, the differentiation factor of where our money comes from is from corporates. 40% of our assets under management in the 2.2 billion fund comes from corporations. And we usually look into the supply chain as in early on, Vale from Brazil. I would assume some of you know them, given the context here with South America. So Vale is in a mining company that is early on in the supply chain, back to who actually buys the car, the consumer at the end of the day. So from the manufacturing parts in China being assembled, the French LP, that is Valeo in our case, kind of looking how everything can be coming together. We talk to each of those LPs and become the strategic advisor to their CVC units, to their M&A departments, and to their innovation teams, where we co-create different business models that will help them to kind of be at the front in the next 10 years of innovation. And that's kind of the fun part of it, because we get to see a lot of solutions that need to have money to scale. And then we have the adopters, the buyers, as in the corporates, that can give us immediate insights in how the product is working and what problem it solves.
Awesome. One of the questions that Brian and I had discussed is how your firm kind of pivoted based on pre-pandemic and post-pandemic.
That's a very good question. For me, personally speaking, I was working at an early stage fund before, and then I moved to growth stage fund. Since I always had the transatlantic bridge, originally I'm from Germany, you may still notice a little accent. I've been in the US for 8 years now, always in San Francisco, by the way. I think what happened in the venture capital world was actually 2 things. Valuations drove up through the roof. Lots of companies were overvaluated. The American funds from the Silicon Valley moved to Europe because it was cheaper to get in certain companies, in particular in climate tech, which was of interest to the US. Lots of really innovative founders came out of really well-known universities. And then early stage, usually the messaging was really, really different, because you need to be plugged into the ecosystem. And unless you know the founders or the universities or anyone that's related to it, it's really, really hard to lead there around. So that's one thing, talking about the pandemic, when we seen US capital moving to Europe, and then vice versa, post the pandemic, valuations went down. We had devaluations of a lot of companies. I moved into growth stage, that considered the sweet spot in a Series B round, where we usually lead 30 to 50 million rounds. And those have been devaluated. So it's really interesting from a portfolio management point of view, and while capital is there, but still kind of, how would I phrase that, in a conservative way, not always being deployed.
Awesome. Claudia, can you talk to us about some of the emerging trends in Latin America and North America and what we've seen, just kind of as we talk about the pivot in the pandemic and things like that?
Definitely the pandemic and then additional things that are going on geopolitically have definitely affected or changed both the expectations as well as the way we did things. The fact that there's also problems in the Red Sea with the ships coming in. There's a low level of water in Panama with the Panama Canal. All of that really affects the availability of the product. And it just disrupts the whole supply chain in general. When you analyze that what we do is manufacture, and we need to be reliable for our final clients, mostly oriented towards the US market, this really becomes one of our top priorities in having to approach the solutions to this. What we've seen is a lot of changes in the requirements, a lot of focus on sustainable development goals, how our projects are actually bringing up, let's say, positive contributions to these goals. And when you analyze that, then that means that there are changes in the way we construct our infrastructure, the way we operate it, the providers that we need to look for, and the compliance and transparency that is expected from us. So there's a lot more data that's being needed to be handled, a lot of implementation in new technology, and definitely that means that we need to innovate, which is one of the reasons we're here. We need to be able to do this in a simple way. We need to be able to be transparent and comply with the expectations, because we see ourselves after, I don't know, probably a few decades oriented towards globalizing the whole process. Now we're regionalizing again. So the requirements to be able to have the different actors communicate, share the right documentation, share the right let's say KPIs and indexes, even the certifications. Right now, we are required to get multiple certifications that have to do with the environment, that have to do with security. So the need to have the controls and the technology to be able to implement all of this is also on the top of our list. And when you analyze what we do that with, in addition to the technology, is people. So we see ourselves having to find and prepare talent that is completely different to the ones that we did before. And we have to plan for that, for the requirements that we have today, but also what we would be having in the future. So there are a lot of, I wouldn't want to call them challenges, just call them opportunities, but definitely innovation and implementation of new technology is one of the main tools that we see that will be helping us.
Great. Mario, same to you. From your perspective, what have you seen, the evolution since maybe the last 5 to 10 years?
Ooh. I think the fact that we still have paper bills of ladings says it all. No, but the truth is the technology that exists today that can solve some of the supply chain problems we have today has not been available 5 years ago. And I think a lot of us are underestimating the power of those increments in technology development. I think when we look at the world, some of the solutions when I started the company in 2021, AI was not there, right? And if it's like I started a company in 1991 and the internet was not there, and then the internet appears and it changes everything. And that's a little bit of what we are seeing. So today, for example, when we look at the ability to customize applications for customers, right, which we do, it's a lot easier than it was 36 months ago. it's a lot cheaper than it was 36 months ago. It reduces the friction of onboarding these customers because, let's be honest, supply chain today happens in Excel, right? I talked to Microsoft about that, and they were like, yeah, you have a great point. Their biggest customer is within that range, right? So I think the biggest development is technology. Claudia alluded to, and I think it's super important, the upskilling of the workforce, because the mental models that people who have been in the industry now for 30 years, they cannot be changed. As sad as it sounds, it's very difficult to change someone who's been around for 30 years to think differently, right? So that is the biggest challenge that we see. So the technology is there. In a way, it has been commoditized, right? Because today, for you to create an application in Python, all you need to do is to dictate that to your phone on ChatGPT, and it brings something out, right? Is it not perfect? No. Does it work? Yes. So, and we've seen that. So we toyed with it. The day that the OpenAI thing happened here in San Francisco, our CTO was there, and he called me and said, this is going to blow your mind. I just created a program using ChatGPT, right? So these two components lead to the next point. So how are supply chains going to be managed within the next 10 years? So everything that we've seen over the last 2-3 years is going to dictate where this is going. And I think when we think about that, the biggest problem that the industry, logistics and supply chain has is the fragmentation of development. So you have thousands of companies, right, but they're not integrating to each other. And that to me kind of brings so I look back, I've been in this for 30 years, and I see, okay, we still do paper bills of lading. We have AI being deployed in a haphazard, crazy way. We have people who have been in the industry for a long time. The youngest ones who are 20, 25 years old, they have a gist of how to operate with AI and some more advanced tools. But in the end of the day, everything that is being developed is scattered all over the place. So I think the changes that have not yet happened are really the key to what's going to happen in the next, I would say, 5 years. And that's how do you create those ecosystems, right?
It's interesting you mentioned AI not existing and then the internet not existing and then it did. And the comment we heard earlier about the barcodes, taking 15 years to implement in the grocery store is just wild. And this question will go to Daniela. The majority of startups in industrial transformation and supply chain technology serve enterprises of other business customers. What advice do you have for founders of such startups and their independent venture capital investors?
It's a very good question because I would need to address it from different angles. If you're a founder and you solve a problem, usually, and I hope you validated what the use case of the problem is. Who is running into that problem? How is the adoption in the industry? And where can you go 5 to 10 years from now? Most of the investors will look into these kind of questions early on to actually see what the potential is for their so-called fund returner. And while you still solve a problem, you actually want to solve the 2040, 2050 goals we have all with the climate change coming up. So I think that's the big vision side of it. On the other hand, from a corporation point of view, it's the adoption rate. We all know having a big tanker ship next to speedboat with the image in front of us, if the speedboat is the startup, visionary, good founders, small team, money behind the back, and they can go at their own speed. Whereas the big corporation has some sort of culture, maybe a tie to a culture that is in a specific region of the world, dependencies thereof, and then therefore has with their own innovation team the search for a specific solution that may address their own problem, but not the problem overall. So I think from a corporate point of view, and that's where we kind of bring the ecosystem together, we need to step back and think about what does the entire world need? What are the problems with the people we're actually talking to? And then what can we feed back to the founder? And maybe a case is helpful here to showcase. So Kering and the L'Oreal, Anta that owns Wilson and Arc'teryx, they all are LPs, and I talk to them on a daily, weekly basis. So knowing their struggles and the next M&A acquisition target or the next investment shows me where their thoughts are. Nevertheless, you have industrial communities that actually put their heads together too and think about, wait a second, next to making yourself more successful in the future and increase your revenue, we need to think about collectively as a group what makes us better in the future. And there are lots of solutions in a room, and I think these are the founder questions you need to ask yourself. Is there an entire industry that looks at your problem, or is it one specific problem that solves the pain point of a single entity?
Wonderful. Claudia, this question's for you. Is it accurate to say that your work cross-cuts the private sector and the public agencies? And how do you see those sectors starting to rethink how they work with one another as the world, grapples with the rising political tensions and public expectations?
Well, I can confirm that that is true. One thing that we've seen is that the successful projects that are sustainable in time do have participation of an aligned strategy with both the private sector and the government sector working together, which is the reason we get together in this association to be able to see how we can do this and still connect the different countries with the same kinds of intentions to be able to get the better results. One of the things that is very clear is that if we, the private sector, generate a solution, it's going to have to be able to interact, comply with the government controls. We are going to have to be accountable. We are going to have to be transparent. So anything that we implement is very important to have the counterpart of the government included there. And what we've seen is, well, the projects that do become successful is when both sides have taken something value added to the table for the other one to also have their peace of mind that things are complying on both ends. In our country specifically, for example, we've had a lot of gains and advances with customs, which normally doesn't happen very often, but it's actually a success story. And they said, well, you know what? We do want to be efficient. We do want to be facilitators of trade, but we need to make sure that we have control as to what is being done. And so, well, that's the whole intention. We have, governance practices that we also need to comply with. Let's get together and define what terms will be okay for you. We landed on specific certifications, the one that is approved by the World Customs Organization, AEO. And with this, we were able to get a response from customs that we can ship under 24 hours, the ones that have that certification. So what we did is both the company that's manufacturing, the park where that company is located at, the transportation provider, and the port are certified. So that does provide a certain swiftness and control over the process. A lot of technology has had to be implemented there for that to work. We still have a long way to go, but it just shows that as long as both sides are included there, the projects are actually more sustainable in time, they're more efficient in the use of the funds, and they just have a broader scope. Same thing with environment. We've seen projects that unless they're done by the whole ecosystem, all the actors involved in that ecosystems that are generated within the industrial parks, they would not be as big, as broad, or as sustainable. So the answer is yes.
Awesome. Mario, for you, between the days as an executive and now as a founder and CEO of MTM Logics, what have you seen as the main difference in what your customers expect from logistics service providers and supply chain technology startups?
Well, what happened when, these were two different worlds. And also in terms of time, when I left Maersk 5 years ago, it was like a completely different world. It was pre-pandemic, it was, as I said, AI was not there. So I think that the expectation level was actually lower, regardless of the fact that I was sitting at the time in the biggest shipping line in the world. one of the things that I think the pandemic brought, but I think I had to kind of fine-tune my vision a little bit too, is that some of the requirements that customers in logistics have, they're coming from somewhere else. So they're coming from another part of their own organization that is not necessarily working the way that they could. So that's also why we started talking about a lot more about supply chain than logistics, because when we started going into customers, when the pandemic happened, I was running a consulting business, and it was really funny because I made a lot of money with consulting in supply chain, which I wanted to get out of. But the reality was that it was never a problem within the area that we were trying to resolve. It was always interconnected with something else. So to me, that kind of sparked the idea, okay, if you want to solve the problem, you really need to integrate, right? You really need to figure a way to build that ecosystem that interfaces with the customer's needs, but not only with this part. It has to be with all the different parts. And that is different, right? Because even though it was a very, I love Maersk. I make jokes about it all the time, but I spent 25 wonderful years there. And I get to be sitting here today because I was there. But the tunnel vision, it's something that as an entrepreneur I can't have, right? Especially if we're talking about supply chain. So yeah, you're very focused on something when you're an executive, right? Regardless of the level. But then as an entrepreneur in this sector, you have to kind of open your horizon a little bit and then figure out, okay, how do you get this problem solved without affecting someone else, right? We had a great example of that last week. We were sitting with a customer in an implementation, and it was nothing to do with the stage of the implementation. We have something called control towers. So we do control towers across the process. And then the supply chain VP of this company, he comes running into the room and he said, "Can you guys help us with a custom situation?" We're like, "Sure, what happened?" "Well, our Chinese supplier sent these doorknobs," it's a fridge company, "doorknobs into Mexico. He doesn't speak Spanish, he doesn't speak English, so he hired someone in Mexico who hired a freight forwarder, who hired a customs broker, and now we don't know where this is." "Oh, okay, so it's surely in the airport." "Yeah, it's in the airport, but nobody knows where it is physically. And we have a production line stopping here in 2 hours, right?" And it was perfect because we were literally implementing a solution that in 3 days would solve that problem. But if we did not have this large horizon, if we were looking at just that part, which was my executive life back in the day, we would not be able to resolve it, right? So when you talk about supply chain, interconnectedness is the key. When you talk logistics, maybe not. Maybe you need to specialize. And I think that is the biggest difference that, or the learning that I've acquired over the last 5 years.
Do we have some time for audience Q&A? What were your thoughts?
I think so.
Great. Let's try it without a mic. If you guys want to raise your hands if you have a question for any of the panelists, and if we can't hear you, I can run over to you. Go ahead, sir. Please if you're able to stand up and ask your question.
How's it going, everybody? My name is Avi Sastry. I have a company called Fluix. My question was for you specifically. In that scenario, what was the solution that you guys implemented to find this supply? Was it inside an airport? I mean, how did you guys do it?
We send a guy.
Oh, you sent a guy.
No, but honestly, because some yeah, well, actually we sent a guy who spoke Spanish, but that's what we did. We sent one of our guys who was in the airport. We said, "Hey, can you go and find this document and actually talk to the customs broker and get it out and drive to the customer?" Sorry? Yeah, that's why we usually talk about ecosystems, right? For example, our company is not trying to buy and again, I'm going to make a comment about Maersk. Maersk's trying to buy companies to build this, right? We see it completely different. I mean, there are trucking companies, there are free trade companies, there's lots of companies already on the ground doing this. What they don't have is the technology that connects it all. Right? That's what we're building. And obviously we need the guy who can go to the airport and pick it up, right?
More questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so we work with private labeling clients who are
Just a second. Here you go. Go for it.
I just assume my loud voice will work, but not always. So we work with private labeling clients, and we're currently working on a project trying to get a client out of Asia, in the Dominican Republic specifically. And what we're finding is obviously a lot of factories that work out of China, their credit lines are typically tied to the PRC, so we're running into this kind of constant race to the bottom, even though we met their quote for what they wanted of FOB cost, of client expectation, of we're getting held against credit, like pricing out of Asia. That's really a credit problem. And so we're talking to the Exim Bank here in the US, but also what resources are available via the free trade zones of countries like the Dominican Republic, that's quite literally where we're going to produce, to solve what is a very large volume project, because that's what we're finding to be the biggest issue.
Okay, guess that's for me. Well, first of all, the free zone sectors are so important within our countries and our economies that both the finance sector as well as the government sector are very willing to find ways to support you. There are specific conditions that are given to free trade zones with very preferential kind of rates for those loans, and optimized and simplified processes to get those. So, for example, in our case, I've had competitive provision of financing with local banks that have been just the same or better than I would be getting with international banks. So what we're doing is we route problems that may come up. We have support from the National Council of Free Zones, we have representatives here, where the problem comes up and they see it as a sector situation to solve. We need to make sure that the companies operating within the sector have an efficient way of doing it and that they feel that they have a local counterpart that helps them. In the case of our park, specifically, our motto is that we are the local counterparts of the companies that operate within our park. So they can focus into what they went there to do, which is either manufacture, provide the services, and we take care of the rest. So we are the ones handling the relationships with customs, with the National Council, with the brokerage associations. So hopefully you're able to route that, completely available for this, but your people are sitting, well, there's one sitting right there. That's the National Council of Free Zones that will definitely help you guide that.
Solving some challenges here. Any other question, please?
My name is Patrick. Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. My name is Patrick, and I spent 25 years working for a company called Flex, which is Flextronics. It's the second largest contract manufacturing company, $30 billion. And I've been working with them doing sustainability stuff as a kind of part-time job almost. And so now that's what we do. We're looking at sustainability for the supply chain in general. And I'm just wondering, what is the supply, how aware is the supply chain? I know, Brian, you've got your 3 pillars there, which is fantastic. Congratulations. I have the same sentiment to you. I want to leave the world a little bit better because people of my generation have kind of maybe taken too much, and it's upsetting. But I'm wondering, what is your sense of how the supply base is actively working on sustainability and actually knows what to do? I don't know. Maybe that's for you. I ran factories in Mexico in the 90s, so I don't know how the small companies are getting ready for their sustainability goals.
So I think sustainability is a function of who's going to pay for it. And I think that's a conversation that no one wants to have. So if you then take it down a notch, okay, how do you measure it? right? Oh, carbon bonds and this, that, and the other. But the reality is that if you take a product, so this bottle of wine, we have this with one of our customers, right? How much carbon is in here, right? And how do you offset that? That's one of the pilot projects that we have. So for you to be able to start the conversation about who's going to pay for it, we have to get to how much does it cost. And for you to get to how much does it cost, then you have an entire chain of events that need to be measured, collected, and then transformed into that CO2 cost and who's going to pay for it. We're in the early stages of that, the way I see. I mean, there's a lot of talk, but the reality is none of the supply side is not interested at all, because it's a very competitive market out there. So nobody wants to say, hey, we're going to do this unless the customer says, I'm only buying this product if and when you have a lower carbon footprint.
Well, adding a little bit to what Mario was saying, we do get requirements every day by our clients and our potential clients asking us, what are you doing? Which SDGs are you actually implementing? What will you ensure of what you have already in progress that you'll be able to comply with in the near future? So all of this is taking place, and the way that we've seen it when we look into the international way of implementing this, not just our country, but internationally, we see the multilateral entities being very, strong in having specific requirements as to what is considered a good free zone. Who is doing it right? What are the successful examples of this, so we can give this as a reference and recommend this as a solution that can be replicated elsewhere. So it really pushes you, independently of who pays for it, but it really pushes you in really looking for projects that do work with Sustainable Development Goals, and even the classification and the recommendations are coming based on that. For example, we are part, as the association, we're part of the GACES, is the Global Alliance for Special Economic Zones, and they just published 50 recommended free zones in the world, and they actually measured that depending on how oriented toward sustainability and the SDGs they were. So it really is making a difference. It's true that before you tend to work out the numbers and see if it's feasible for you to implement that as a project, but right now we're seeing that you're not going to be selected if you don't. So obviously some of the companies, we start on ahead. That is something that we're very responsible and focused on. But the others will follow, because right now the clients are expecting this from you. And do that with water treatment, with gender parity, which to me is very important. So that there's a lot of it that is being expected from the providers. And I think that that's when the shift actually comes, when it's not that if it's financially feasible or not, if that it's required if you want to stay in the game.
Question? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I would love to add a little bit from a financial point of view and also regulatory framework. While it's completely separated from a financial point of view, think about as an investor who wants to lead the way and pave the way for new innovations coming out. Now, if we thought 3-5 years ago, would anyone have hired a head of ESG in their company? Maybe not. Was it on vogue? Yes. Did their clients expect it to have one? Probably. And the same thing is happening with AI. And my connection between those two dots is actually data. The data points we're seeing right now in the companies, as in climate tech, popping up, bringing relevant data to the game, not only in the supply chain, but generally speaking, are actually putting everything on paper in order to understand where to take and have a difference. And the differentiating factor is actually then when you decide with whom you partner up with. Swallowing this cost versus actually working with the right partner is what the end customer needs at the end of the day, and that entire value chain comes together. That's one part. And from a regulatory framework, which I'm really passionate about, the Inflation Act that has been signed here in the US, right? It's only one part. There are 3 acts. It's a kind of zero-sum attitude, obviously, bring manufacturing, bring jobs back into the country. We see that globally. So from that point of view, regulatory frameworks and some sort of value add is necessary to keep it in the country or in a region. So from that point of view, I think it's really important that we value that. And there is an ESG framework in Europe that is currently being ruled out. There's an AI regulatory framework that is being ruled out. The US obviously looks at it in a similar way, but different. But with regards to the supply chain manufacturing side, there will be stops and there will be certain thresholds that are not longer acceptable.
Go ahead.
I just have one more question about, you brought up a good point right now. When we look at AI and data, if it's too open source, let's say a model is too open source, all the data silos become fragmented. Everyone has access to the models, they use it for their own data silos. But if it becomes too closed models, then the data silos stay too proprietary. So then you have less fragmentation. But right now, I mean, nothing against funders here, but we see a lot of cannibalistic AI ideas. Same AI idea, but different vertical. Oh, but they're same models. So the question I wanted to ask, if I were to frame it in one, what do you guys think about open and closed source models in supply chain specifically, and how that helps with fragmentation of proprietary data sets? I know it's a very specific question, but let's get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I also have an opinion about that. I think the open versus closed, so if you make it open, so okay, everything's open source, there is no incentive to fund. Let's be honest, right? And funding is a big part of the industry and the development. We see a lot of failed projects in log tech because if you're charging on a per transaction, I was sitting on the board of a company before I started my own, and they were doing a transaction-based costing, and it was not sustainable, right? So that is a problem. You need to find a way to integrate into that entire value chain, and that is what's going to fund. So if you make it open source, you can get that funding because then everybody has access to the unfair advantage that you're creating. If you make it too closed, then that unfair advantage is all kept to you. Great, except that then you do not get the network effects, right? So one of the things that we are talking a lot to different people, because we believe in ecosystems, right, is how do you generate the necessary standards for it, right? Just to give you an example, there is an entity in Europe called the Digital Shipping Container Association, and their job is to figure out what are the standards for bills of lading, airway bills, and a bunch of these things, right? So if you have those standards, then you can create a model that can work, it's closed, but then it's connected to a standard, right? I don't think there is a definitive answer yet, because as we evolve, what we will see is that is not going to be the large language models that will dictate what gets done. To me, those are like Netscape in 1993. The business that gets built on top of those models is where we will see the impact, right? And to a large extent, those businesses, they're being started now, right? Because there has been not much time between those models, the mathematics of those models being created, them being put to use, and now what do you do with it for real, right? The example I like to give to people is you had internet, great, Netscape, great, Amazon, oh, great, right? So the same thing's going to happen now, but I don't think we're there yet. Hopefully we are, but I think there is some more that needs to happen. So there is an open source component, standards, right? HTTP back in 30 years ago, and then some other stuff that will be built on top of that, and that's going to be proprietary.
Sorry, I wanted to add something. I also think it's a security concern. If we go back a couple of years ago where we had on-prem data versus the cloud, and now with AI technology, most of the corporates are actually quite facing the question, where shall we store the data? Who has access to it? And it's a bigger question than before, next to the energy consumption that comes on top of it. So I think those 2 points should never be forgotten as we move forward into that new technology age.
Just a statement, that one thing people forget about is the transfer of data and that carbon associated with the transfer.
100%.
We're going to have 2 more questions here, and then we're going to wrap.
Thank you, Christopher. This is Atul Patel here, co-founder of DLT Ledger, a multi-party supply chain digitalization framework. I do have a very specific question on FSMA, which is the Food Safety Modernization Act, which has been put in place in January 2023 here in US. Companies have about 3 years to kind of comply to, which is about January 26. So now a lot of those imports are happening from LATAM into North America. So maybe to a LATAM delegation as well, and maybe to you, are they looking at any kind of technology to get that traceability in? And maybe as an expert on, on logistics side, do you see anything that, providers from Mexico who are providing those ingredients to the large companies in US, are they doing any tech around that? And is that something coming up, or they would find a way around this ruling as well as it comes into life?
You want to start? Or?
I can start with it. I need you to finish. Going into, I can talk about the Dominican Republic in specific, but I know that our division that has to do with food administration, provision, and exports are trying to implement technology to make sure that we're able to modify the permits that we already have, the certifications and approvals that each one of those need. We know that these changes really generate very worrying kind of conditions, especially with the time of compliance. With the time of compliance, and then the time it takes even to get the permits. So we're seeing this not just affecting our agriculture and exports, but actually affecting our operational and permit application and completion. So it's very elaborate, and these are things that just the same that of what we're doing with our supply chain, with traditional and other kinds of products. Obviously, the part of agriculture is there. And it's the fact that it's got shorter terms and expectations in regards to execution. It makes it even a more interesting kind of priority up there.
We just have a ready solution, so I just thought it was an opportunity.
Well, I don't think we have representatives from that division, but I'm completely available to put you in contact with them once I get back.
Just complementing that, I think if you have a ready solution, then definitely we need to talk. 2 weeks ago, I had a meeting with an exporter out of Mexico into the US, tomatoes. And it was the first time I heard about that. And what he was worried about is the entire traceability, right? Which is a problem, because if your supply chain is fragmented into multiple layers and different providers and the data does not flow, you have an issue, right? So let's hook up.
Hi, my name's Hamilton Perkins. I'm founder of Hamilton Perkins Collection. We're focusing on depolymerizing plastics in the fashion industry. I'm trying to somewhat end on a sustainability note, I guess. I'm curious what your thoughts are on sort of companies in supply chain as we look at this $100 trillion opportunity. What is the highest kind of use and value as climate tech companies are approaching sort of the companies in your portfolios and in your actual companies? What are some of the areas where you see kind of like the best use where it's not just becoming a cost, but it's becoming an economic value add?
Maybe I can start here. So from our investment vertical, consumer tech, obviously supply chain is a huge, huge topic. And to summarize our most recent investment in a company called Ghost out of LA, they do, you know them? Okay, yeah. So we let their Series B round, and they target the recircular economy. So basically, if you think about anything that's being overproduced based on Excel sheets, then don't fit the purpose any longer. So there's lots of data points that can be used differently, but what they're solving is basically everything beyond that. Overproduction, season is over, we know the TK Maxx of the 90s, but what it did to the fashion brands and their valuation, it actually declined over time, which led to the point that most high-end fashion brands burn their entire collections after a season. And that's a minimal approach in how to actually connect a platform, but they created a marketplace where the buyer and the seller buys stock of each other. So it's excess inventory that is being solved instead of being wasted. That's one part of it. The second part is, as an example, a company which I found really interesting. They do both. They target the Patagonias of this world and Walmart and Target and really narrow down every single supplier in their supply chain, down to wherever the supplier is manufacturing bits and pieces. And based on that information, they have some sort of traffic light approach where they regulate it with how many employees, how safe it is, who do they employ, et cetera, safety concerns, regulatory frameworks, and they bring that back to the buyer to make proposals, as in you continue to work with this supplier, but that supplier raises some concerns or questions over. So it eliminates the risk, but it actually promotes the supplier that is the better solution from an ESG point of view. Retraced.
I'm going to ask the final question here, a single word answer from our panelists, and I'm going to actually ask the audience as well. We have summer coming up. We're in the middle of spring now. Beach or mountains?
Beach.
Beach?
Beach.
Beach?
Both.
Okay. Raise your hand. Beach people? Yes. Mountain people? Awesome. Let's give our panelists a round of applause here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.